Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world. And join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, and the rest of the Gentleman Bastard Brigade as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling nerd on. Wee doggy, it is February 29th. That's right, it's leap year, and you'd think that we wouldn't have a lot of pro wrestling history on this date, but you would be wrong. We got history dating all the way back to 1940. But before we get started, we're going to start off on that positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1920, 1960s Worldwide Wrestling Federation Enhancement Wrestler, Steve Stan Lee. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for February 29th. 2004, IWA wrestler Jay Prodigy. 2012, NWA territorial wrestler Woody Farmer. Alright, enough of the sad stuff. We got pro wrestling history that only happens once every 4 years to get to. These are your pro wrestling history highlights for February 29th. 1940, Prince Aliki defeats Pete Belcastro for the Pacific Coast Light Heavyweight title in Eugene, Oregon. 1964, Ray Stevens defeats Dominic DeNucci to win the San Francisco NWA United States Heavyweight title in San Francisco, California. That same year, across the coast, Worldwide Wrestling Federation World Champion Bruno Sammartino defeats Killer Kowalski in Paterson, New Jersey. 1968, Kurt Von Brunner defeats Thunderbolt Patterson for the Amarillo NWA Brass Knuckles title in Amarillo, Texas. Man, do I love me some Thunderbolt Patterson. 1972 sees 6 different wrestling shows happen across the nation. Which one of these would you want to be at? The first one in Indianapolis. The main event sees Dick the Bruiser and Sailor Art Thomas defeat WWA Tag Team Champions Blackjack Lanza and Blackjack Mulligan by DQ. The second show in Macomb, Georgia, sees in the main event Bill Dromo defeat Flash Monroe in a wire fence match. The third show in Tampa, Florida, sees in the main event Southern champ Bobby Shane and Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods wrestle to a 60-minute draw. The fourth show of the day ran in Fort Myers, Florida, sees in the main event Jack Welch and Ron Fuller defeat Don Duffy and Ronnie Garvin via DQ. The fifth show of the day in Odessa, Texas, sees in the main event Ciclone Negro defeat Dory Funk Sr. in a Texas death match. And last but not least, the sixth show, Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, run Raleigh, North Carolina. In the main event, Paul Jones and Nelson Royal beat Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen by DQ. Out of those 6 shows, which, based off of the main event, which show would you go to? For me, I would go to that Tampa, Florida show to see that Bobby Shane versus Tim Woods 60-minute draw. For you young people that don't know Tim Woods' work, please, please, please do me a favor and look him up tonight. Alright, we're jumping to 1976, where Worldwide Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Champion Bruno Sammartino defeats Waldo Von Erich in 14 minutes and 8 seconds in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. 1980, a Memphis wrestling event at the Mid-South Coliseum sees Jerry Lawler beat the Dream Machine. As a result, Lawler receives a match with Jimmy Hart. Jerry Lawler beats Jimmy Hart. 1984, in the first ever WWF event main evented by 2 minorities, Rocky Johnson defeated Tiger Chung Lee via countout. 1988, the Bruise Brothers, Don and Ron Harris, defeat Max Payne and Gary Hart to win the Continental Wrestling Association Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee. But the Harris boys weren't quite done working that day, because that evening at an AWA event at the Mid-South Coliseum, Ron and Don Harris wrestled to a time-limit draw with Jimmy Jack Funk and Doug Gilbert. 1992, WCW held the second annual Super Brawl pay-per-view. God, I always have a hard time saying that one. In the main event, Sting pinned WCW World Heavyweight Champion Lex Luger with a crossbody off the top rope to win the title. But for me, that's not the story of that show. Brian Pillman pinned WCW Light Heavyweight Champion Jushin Thunder Liger with a leg roll-up into a bridge to win the title, becoming the first two-time champion. And in my personal opinion, one of my top 5 favorite matches of all time. So if you're going to look up one match today, look up that match. I know a lot of people point to their first Nitro appearance, but trust me, this one is way better. 1992, the WWF run 2 different shows, one in the afternoon and one in the evening, and 2 wrestlers do main event double duty. The first show, at the Boston Garden, was headlined by Hulk Hogan and WWF Intercontinental Champion Roddy Piper defeating Sid Justice and WWF Champion Ric Flair when Hogan pinned Flair. The second show that evening was held in Springfield, Massachusetts. In the main event, WWF Intercontinental Champion Roddy Piper defeated WWF World Champion Ric Flair in a non-title steel cage match. As both men scaled down the cage, a blow from Flair sent Piper down to the floor for the win. Come on, you didn't think Hogan and Sid were the ones who did double duty, did you? Those were your pro wrestling history highlights for February 29th. I'm the Eclectic Gentleman, Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow.